So welcome back. This is Night Flight, and yeah, as you can see, Gary Wayne is back, and we are going to talk about the Lord of the Rings. And I'm very happy to have him here. In case you're wondering why he is not here more often, these days you have to wait up to 6 months to have him on, and that is the reason why. So welcome, Gary. How are you?
Yeah, we're doing very well. Obviously, a little too busy for my likings, but you don't complain about these things because you want to have be able to get your message out, your research out, promote my books. So yeah, it's been crazy. The last year has been, and it's not sort of stopping. So. And what's really good as well is, I do a lot of repeat shows, like I do, a number with you every year and for your audience. But I get a lot of new audiences and hosts coming in all the time. But, it's crazy though. I mean, the amount of podcasters out there now is, you can't even count them all. So
Yeah.
it's become the way of getting, communicating things because you got time to be able to do it. So yeah, very, very busy. And looks like I'm going to be busy for a while.
Yeah, and especially with a new book, I assume, yeah, the
Yeah,
requests are just coming in and coming in. Yeah,
yeah. So if people can see in the background, it's the gray version versus the
yeah,
brown version for book two. And that's Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. How understanding prehistory and giants helps to uh, understand end time prophecy. So it's very sort of appropriate that we're going to talk about Lord of the Rings, and it is about prehistory, and people may not realize it, but there's giants that are part of that whole fairy tale, so to speak.
yeah, yeah. And Gary, just before we start, one um, interview that we did got a lot of attention for my standards. I know there are people out there, they have hundreds and sometimes even millions of views. I'm a
Yeah.
small potato. And that was Chronicles of Narnia.
Oh,
And
that went over well, did it?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
good. Yeah.
But recently I received a comment, and I just wanted to address this briefly because
Sure.
we are going to dissect another franchise.
Yes, we are. So we're on thin
And
ice with a lot of listeners.
yeah. And the comment said, "Oh, you had to destroy the Chronicles of Narnia for us as well.
Yeah.
Couldn't you leave us anything? I am very disappointed."
Yeah.
And
So
my reaction to that was, how old are you? Five? An adult should be able to handle that kind of information. I mean, honestly, allegedly, everybody wants the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then you can't start shooting at the messenger.
Yeah, it's important information to sort of understand that these are great writers. They have great craft skills, but they have knowledge and an agenda with what they're communicating. They turn it into fabulous entertainment and literature, but it's done for a purpose and it's done for their belief system. And I'm not saying you shouldn't believe in what they believe in. All I'm saying it's a religious belief system, and you should be aware of that because if you had a Christian creating stories and telling you it's not Christian and it's just allegorized and they're actually giving you history that you may not agree with, they're giving you um, principles and things that you may not agree with, then you would want to be aware of that, particularly if it was targeted at your children. And so you would want to know what they're being taught about. And is there anything in there that they should be aware of that is part of the brainwashing process? And unfortunately, that's also part of the agenda with the books is to prepare people for to accept things and for things that they plan to bring about. So yeah, it's I know it's tough. But when you look at what Lewis wrote. and he said he converted, but he never denounced what he wrote. So if he ever was ever truly a Christian, probably not, maybe at the end, but then you would have said, hey, I wrote a lot of things. He would have done a blanket statement at least to put a little distance in between him. And the amount of information that he embedded in there comes from a source that a university student or people in their early 30s wouldn't have. And so all of that doesn't make any sense. And then they disguise their bloodlines. So, as to say that there's just this is sort of common people who went to Oxford. Well, back in the 20s and 30s and before, average people didn't go to Oxford. You're part of the bloodline nobility elite. And there's a few other, places of education for those purebloods as well. But no, they weren't your average Christian. But they certainly took the guise of it, and they wrote some terrific stories, but it's loaded with things that you need to be aware of.
Yeah. And I remember that Tolkien, some of his private exchange of letters has been published. And in one of the letters, he said something along the lines that something took over and that it be, got a life, I'm paraphrasing here, it
Yep.
got a life of its own. And then he said, I have created a monster. And he was talking about Lord of the Rings. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And I don't know whether he was channeling some of that information or what when he's talking about the life part of it. But what he created was a new mythos in the mythopoetic category that's based on history, just with fictional characters that are based on real characters and an interesting fairy tale plot put to it, where they like to have a happy ever after ending where it covers the cover story of what they call both Lewis and Tolkien, the eucatastrophe, where the hero is avoided the terrible end, which is normally what happens with heroes or giants, right? So,
Mm.
yeah, I can see why it sort of grew to be way bigger because now we have all of these other writings based on that culture, that language, those bloodlines. And when we start to get the obvious, like with the House of Dragon, it becomes very, very clear that that is just an extension out of everything that Tolkien was writing. And maybe from his perspective, it's going too far on the revelation of information allegorized into fairy tales.
Mm. So yeah, I found it here. I wrote it down. It says Tolkien invented the Elvish language, and he mentioned the story of the Lord of the Rings came to him as a result of the new language.
Yeah.
While he wrote the manuscript, he said, my work has escaped from my control. I have produced a monster.
Yeah.
His own
Well,
words, not mine.
yeah. And it would all would seem that maybe he wasn't absolutely in control of his mind or body, and that means demon possession and channeling of spirits. So, and very difficult to contend with because they don't tend to leave. So he may have wrestled with that all of his life. But interesting, had not heard that quote, but for whatever his concerns were, uh, it would seem to be that we should take that as legitimate warning that, you know, this is important things to understand. And here's where I would go sort of biblically with it, not to
Mm,
get too biblical, but Ecclesiastes 1 is that it talks about nothing new is under the sun. What was will be again. And the knowledge of this or the understanding of this only brings grief and sorrow. I've paraphrased a fairly large passage, but those are the highlights of it. And so, if this is based on prehistory and we're in the cycle of those things repeating, we may be close to that cycle repeating again. So we do need to understand what's going on so that we can decide what we think and why we're doing what we're doing and how do we respond to all of these horrible things going on in the world. And the only way we can understand um, what is coming is to understand the horrible things before the flood and shortly after the flood. And then all of the attempts to try and get back to that level of technology and knowledge and state of war that happened just before the flood.
Mm. There are speculations about Tolkien that he was a member of the Golden Dawn.
Yep.
And but I couldn't really find anything conclusive.
Yeah. So here's the part that people need to sort of put together in terms of how does that work?
Mm,
And Rosicrucian is higher than Illuminati. It's
yeah.
higher than Freemasonry.
Mm,
And so how does Lewis and Tolkien become part of the Golden Dawn Order? Well, there is two sides to that coin in terms of how they get there. So one that we talked about was is their royal bloodlines. And as a royale, they would be initiated from childhood. So they would be so far above first level of adept in Freemasonry at third degree in the York on the York Rite or 33rd degree on the Scottish Rite that they would be, let's say on the third degree, they would be higher than fifth degree, which would be sort of somebody that oversees the lodges in a regional manager sort of basis. They're higher than fifth degree, which basically most of the Illuminati are. They would be higher than, the seventh and degree and higher that sort of in the Rosicrucian level. I don't know how high it goes. Could go as high as 33 of the old degrees. But they would be classified with that knowledge from childhood as 32nd degree. And that's not in the Scottish Rite because they classify themselves as a 32nd degree adept. And if you're a 32nd degree Scottish Rite, you're not an adept. You have to be full 33rd degree. We called that. That's the title the purebloods take for being adept level that they become very early on in life because of all these degrees, but they cannot take an adept title till sometime between 25 and 30 years old as an adult. So they call themselves a 32nd degree adept, which sounds like misinformation or something that's inaccurate, but it's actually within the bloodlines an important sort of concept. So they would be higher than a Rosicrucian order at the time of Oxford when they're in their early 20s, let's say, right? So how does that sort of work? And the Golden Dawn is part of the Rosicrucian order. And of course, the famous Aleister Crowley. And many people that were part of the Golden Dawn order were writers. And the writing guilds and the writing education and shops, however you want to put it, is a standard throughout history. So the Inklings, they're not learning about getting knowledge. They're learning how to write the knowledge into a specific style and the mythopoetic style that comes out of the Inklings. So the Inklings is a Rosicrucian Golden Dawn sponsored writing fellowship at Oxford. And so you would not be part of that. It would be like going to an Ivy League school in the US. And you may get in there on a sponsorship as they do these days. But you would not be part of the Skull and Bones secret society that's only for the pseudo blue bloods of the people in the US that are trying to intermarry and get a higher level through the next generation. So that's an exclusive club, but they were not there to get the knowledge. They already had the knowledge. They were raised in it. So now they're just learning how to sell it and write it.
yeah. And Tolkien was very good friends with Charles Williams.
Yes. And McDonald.
Yeah. And so and no matter how you slice that, his work reflects Neoplatonic ideas, Hermetic ideas,
Yeah.
and on it goes.
Yep.
So no matter how conclusive it is, yes, he was going on or he
Yeah.
was not. There is something going on which, if you know how to decipher the symbolism,
Yes.
then you have to come to the conclusion there has to be some sort of connection with
Yes.
secret societies, even if it is only that he heard stuff from others that were higher in the club.
Yeah. And his family, I mean, he said not to be of nobility bloodlines, but his family name, you go back not very far, like a generation or so, you start to get into the nobility. Same with Lewis. And it originally originates from Scandinavia and then later Germany, and also part of the migration into Normandy of the Norse with the conquering by Rollo and others, where the name, Tolkien comes from. And so it means son of Tolk, Tulk. And Scandinavian, it's Toka, Tok, Toki, and Tor, as in Tor or Thor, the god. And so you also get derivatives of it as tuck, because the vowels can be interchanged and just transliterations as well. Even up to the 7th century, you start to see like the tuck variation comes in. They move in with the Norse invasions into England, but where Tolkien comes from is his family from that Norse invasion is going to move over to Germany, and then they're going to move back to England. And in Germany, they're known as Tolkien, Tolkienen, Tolksdorf, Tolkien, and Tolk. And they were mostly in East Prussia, but there was also one Tolks in other pockets of Germany as well. So, but all of those are nobility families of the Norse bloodline.
Mhm. Yeah. And that is something, when I hear Middle Earth, I automatically think of Midgard, you
Yeah,
know,
it is. It is. It's the
yeah.
same. It's it's exactly that. And and the names that are used in his elf language, they're combination of old Swedish. They're combinations of old German, Celtic languages, and that would include Gaelic and Old Irish and Welsh. And he's mixing some of those languages, and whether or not he knew all of those languages or it's being given to him, or it's actually these are all variations that come out of the original Indo-Aryan kind of language that was spoken before the flood. We don't know, but it's got a lot of kinship with Indo-Aryan language or Indo-European language, which was the language of the giants, language of the offspring of the gods, and very much related to the complete fairy hierarchy of visible little ones and larger ones.
Mhm. What I found a little bit confusing is Middle Earth. Yeah, okay, we know the hobbits are there,
Yep. Yep.
but are the humans also there in Middle
Yes.
Earth? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Middle Earth is, as we understand it in other polytheist cultures, is the separation of the waters, which is the chaos. And we have the separation of the firmament as it's described in heaven. Now you can have dry land that surfaces. And that and that is Middle Earth. And then you have what's above that in the sky and or beyond the firmament, which is heaven, and then you have the underworld underneath, but typically in another dimension. So, but that's a standard all around the world. You get the same biblically, you get it in all polytheist religions. So, yeah, Middle Earth is basically the antediluvian age, whether it's all one continent or not, as some people uh, believe, and as it's sort of depicted in Lord of the Rings. That would be a reflection of that concept, whether he's getting that out of the polytheist side, or he's going to the time before the continents were divided. But I'm not sure whether it's a single continent before the flood or not. You could sort of get there, but it's a bit of a reach, I think.
Mhm. Yeah. And so then we have this, yeah, I would say it's the so-called creator, and his name is Iluvatar.
Yeah, isn't that an interesting name?
Yeah. Yeah.
Er, Eru the
Hmm.
um, what is it? Eru the Ilvatar. And what that is it's Iluvatar is Avatar. Yeah, anyways, there's Avatar that's in there. That's where I'm trying to get my tongue to go to, and it's not working. And this is the high god. This one sits above the eight gods that are part of the pantheon. And so this one would be very, very similar to Vishnu. So you're seeing that avatar concept woven into the name, and Vishnu is the avatar of the Avatara Buddha who receives power, the Avatara of Narasimha, which is that lion-like demigod, and others. And Vishnu was an avatar many, many times. So again, this knowledge that comes from Tolkien is absolutely spectacular in terms of the far reaches of things that he's prepared to write into it. So you get a lot of names that have IL and EL in the characters, which is the typical understanding in the Sumerian transliterations of the Hebrew words, or vice versa. IL is a god. ILU would be a god as it's spelled there. Um, and it could be translated as mighty, as you get that U as a sort of a feminine aspect, but within the application of the power of the name. So what we're to give it an example from a biblical basis, we have El, which is can be a god or an angel, as it's the capital superlative sense, the singular for El Elyon. The plural, male plural, is Elohim, which can mean, multiple gods or the superlative nature of God or the triune of God. And then you have Eloah, which is the feminine version of El, which can mean a goddess or the application of God's powers.
Yeah.
So you could sort of take that, any way that you want. But yeah, I mean, you have that as the high God. That is absolutely unbelievable. That is being taken from the high God of a pantheon halfway across the world, even though I make the connection to the Tuatha da Dannan and the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norse, where Tolkien comes from. So he's giving his own family flair and his own Scandinavian version of the fairy mythos, but he's mixing in other stuff. Yeah, and these are, the people who are the Tuatha Danu or the Tuatha Da Danann or the Scythians. And that's a tribe that it really means as you go Tuatha Danu, it's the tribe of Anu, it's the tribe of a god and or a goddess, depending on how you want to translate that.
And
And
aren't they essentially Nephilim?
yeah,
Yeah. Mm.
yeah. And so the fair folk are the Tuatha De Danann, and they were pale skinned, they were red haired, hazel eyed, and blonde hair and blue eyed and pale skin. There's
So
the
like
two
me.
varieties. Yeah, 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 exactly. And so that's why, the word, it's understood as being even Indo-Aryan Tuta means tribe of a god. As you take Tuatha De Danann back, and that's very much as you're probably familiar with, the German god Toisto or Tosco, which is the same sort of Celtic god. That would be Ymir in the Celtic sort of version, probably closer to, I think, yeah, probably Ymir would be closer to the Welsh version. So it is a word that we need to be aware of, that these are sons of a god, a specific god of the pantheon, just as the gods or the angels in the book of Enoch created Nephilim and patriarchal and eponymously named tribes, both before and after the flood. So this is something that's very, very unique. And you get the connection to the Shay people, which the Tuatha Da Dannan people were also known as, and that the noble elf, um, as they're called in the Lord of the Rings, they're taller than the little ones. And these are what is known in the fairy culture as white elves. And they're completely distinct from the elemental group, which are the smaller ones. This is the allegorized version of the noble Celtic race. This is the noble Aryan race, and that they're not depicted in their full giant status, but they are connected with the pale color of the skin that they have. They seem to have elf ears, and he's encoding something else into that sort of meaning with that. That might have to do with the fairy queens on the matriarchal bloodline versus the dragon bloodline of the patriarchal side that Tolkien is meshing in there. But these are the fair folk of the Tuatha Da Danann, and in this case, the Norse version or the Germanic version or the ones that went up the Danube, because you could include Kiev, you could include Moscow, Germany, where branches of those all made settlements into. So yeah, I think it's very, very important to make that distinction. And that's where you get into understanding why it's called the Lord of the Rings. That starts to make the connections. And when you understand that Tolkien creates a number of the asserted beings that were created by the gods, and these are just one of the creator of the gods, and they were called the High Elves of Eru. So again, it's that elven title that's important to understand as well, but I don't want to get too far ahead. And then one other thing about um, the the high elves were also called Vala and Valal. And that seems to be a very close connection to Valhalla of the Norse. And Valhalla, which means, where the high elves live. Uh, and also you have the Germanic word hell for the underworld. And Norse hell are the same sort of word, and kind of the English source word as we understand the word hell, or part of the underworld. So he's woven a lot of stuff in there from 1,000 different angles just in that sort of imagery. But they're part of a special um, fellowship of the ring. But I don't want to get too far down the road here on some of the details. So I'll stop there and let you back in.
Yeah. Okay. So just for clarification, maybe I heard that wrong. These little cute elves, they are always fairies. They are always portrayed in a very cute way.
Yep.
So they are not part of the Nephilim race, the fairies that we see in mythology.
They are a different creation than the
Okay.
giants. I
Mhm.
would put them under the same umbrella.
Okay.
In all cultures, they're created by the gods in a similar way, but obviously something different because they're not very big. And they fit below the hierarchy of where the giants are. So these are what the occult calls the elementals. And there's four groups of the elementals. One is the larger one, which is the salamander group, and it's a reptilian one. And they're kind of said to live in the earth. So whether it's in the other world in another dimension or underground, and they're taller than humans, but they're not giant-like. And the other three elementals are little people. And there's three different groups in all cultures, on all continents, all around the world for these four groups and the three that I'm going to talk about. So you have good-looking ones, and like Tinkerbell and Peter Pan would be sort of a representation of one of those. And there are many kinds of good-looking ones as they're listed. You have mischievous ones like leprechauns and a whole host of those. And then you have the ugly ones like the hobbits and the dwarves and the gnomes and the trolls. And again, there's a whole bunch of those. But many of those ugly ones we see in the Lord of the Rings. And so their creation is somehow distinct. Some of them have changeling capabilities, they have interdimensional travel ability. Some of them have great technology like the gnomes and and sort of UAPs as we would understand it coming through fairy domens or portals. And these are part of uh, a number of kinds of elementals that are created to do service in the visible hierarchy for the kings, the giants, the white elves, and the Lord of the Rings. So, for example, in elemental mythology, again, all around the world, the hobbits, not the hobbits, the dwarves made the weapons for the demigods, the giants, and they lived in the earth. So in Lord of the Rings, you see these great manufacturing facilities making weapons of war where the dwarves are making them.
Yeah.
And they have their own king and their own sort of tribe. And so they're all created for specific reasons to fit into the visible hierarchy and all created by the gods. In the Bible, we get elementals as well, and it could be translated out of Greek of stoichion as elemental, or it could be translated as rudiment in the KJV Bible. And these are the ones that are part of the hierarchy as they're described that keep us enslaved and in bondage in this world, that are still operating after the flood. So you have ones again like the mystery of the giants, how they're before the flood and they're after the flood, whether they're recreated again or they survived or both. Doesn't really matter. They show up on both sides of the historical chronology.
Hmm. Yeah, when you pointed that out with the Avatar and Iluvatar, that was exactly when I saw that name. I thought, yeah, yeah, Avatar, sure. And yeah, Buddha is the ninth emanation
Yep.
of Vishnu.
Incarnation. Yep.
Yeah, and so another word that really struck me was Istari, the
Yeah.
messengers. Yeah. And sorry, I can't help it, but it reminds me of Ishtar.
Yeah. I mean, you just can't get away from the closeness to it. And that's what he's done in a lot of the names and things. He's changed a letter or so, or he might have combined two languages like um, Old Irish and Hebrew together, for example, which isn't, some of the names that he's used. So yeah, the Astari the are the wizards. These are the priests. These are the ones that receive all the shamanic knowledge, the seven sacred sciences, and the knowledge from the gods to do magical things. And it's part of the polytheist religion. And Saruman is the evil leader of these wizards. And then you have Gandalf, which has the word elf, ALF, encoded into it. And he's also a wizard of the Istari. And so who Ishtar is a queen of heaven. She
Mm.
is the consort to the patriarchal god. So she'd be the fairy queen. She'd be the owl queen of the dragon line. And So it's important to sort of understand that this Queen of Heaven is a title by the major god, both before and after the flood, or the chief god. So Odin would have a consort, for example, in the Norse pantheon. And then as Eru, as the Iluvatar, is doesn't have a consort, as Satan doesn't. But again, I think that's consistent with Satan having his consort killed or put into the pit prison, as Tiamat is, and Leviathan, and again, in I don't have the name at the tip of my tongue because it's a tongue twister, but in the Norse mythology, they have Leviathan type creatures, two of them, and the female is killed, and it's Lotan in other religions. It's all around the world. So again, it's all sort of being based on that from what I can tell. And it's a really unique way of capturing a lot of messages because you have to remember the adepts understand all of this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so they're decoding everything with it. From people who aren't in that craft, like myself, I'm not. So you have to work at finding the superficial things that you can to start understanding what they're doing.
Yeah. There was another name. I probably forgot that, but it is Ero and then Ia, but dots on the A. But Ia is also, we know that from the Anunnaki. So to me, it appears to be a hodgepodge of North
Yep.
mythology, Hinduism, and yeah,
That's
Anunnaki and what have you.
that's because they believe there's one root Indo-Aryan religion
Hmm.
that crossed the flood. And then he's put the Norse slant on it for the fairy people or the fairy mythos. And so you get that sort of version versus the Celtic version in England and Ireland or elsewhere in the world. So if we understand that Zoroastrianism is what we would know in the West as the same religion as the Indo-Aryans that settled in the Indus Valley. Zoroastrian was in Persia and home of the Aryan bloodline that became the Achaemenid kings of Persia and the Beast Empire that came from the Scythia region as Indo-Aryans when they migrated into those areas. So yeah, they're um, he's well versed in mixing those things. So you have like Aragorn instead of Aragon.
Hmm.
So he's changed one word. You have Elrand, so EL in there. You have Bergil, IL on the end, and who knows what the Berg part is. But everything he's done, those compounded combined words are all part of different languages or different sort of meanings. And then you have Glorfindel, and Findel is like a old Irish word for a Shay or a Shay people. And the Tuatha da Dannan were known as the Shay or the Sedai or the Seed people or the She people. Um, and then he's got the EL on the end again. So he's, and who knows what Galore stands for, where he got that from, but you could spend forever trying to trace where he's getting it from. So he couldn't write this quickly unless he had immense knowledge and was of an astounding genius level, or he had access to that information, or it was provided to him.
Hmm. And you would not subscribe to the idea that he managed to do that because he was a good linguist.
No, I think the artistic of the narrative he
Hmm.
wrote.
Hmm.
But I think he was either educated in the knowledge, which I would bet on, or he was had access to libraries and banks of knowledge we didn't have, or perhaps as what you were quoting earlier, maybe he was taken over and possessed by demons who dictated this information to him, just as you get similar things like with the Book of Mormon and other sort of scriptures that might be around the world. My favorite of the names is Denethor, Denethor, because now you're combining the god Thor and Dene as in Danu, or as in, the tribe of Anu, which is Thor in that sort of understanding, or maybe this is a son of Anu, which is Thor. So a very interesting combination of a name there again as well. And then I looked at Saruman, with this wizard thing, and you have this invention of a word to replace dragon a couple of hundred years ago. So before Tolkien starts to write, and they replace dragon with dinosaur. And the last part is Saur, and he's using that as in a reptilian type of being. And Sorrow Man is like a reptilian or a dinosaur man or a dragon man. And again, if we look at seraphim angels, they were serpent-faced six-winged dragons and produced giants that look just like them. The giants as we understand it. And then there's the serpent in Eden, which is part of a race of people. And it goes back to the Hebrew Nahash, meaning serpent, and its root word, Nahash, spelt the same way, Nachash, with the CH as the C is silent there. And it means a sorcerer. It means a necromancer. It means an enchanter. It's a sorcerer. This was a race of sorcerers. This is the Istari order of the wizards that Saruman is leading. And again, the amount of depth of the nuance of the and information that's encoded in there is absolutely astounding. And so, I mean, this race of serpents that went for the most part extinct, unless maybe the salamanders are some survivors of those, and thus higher up in the hierarchy, from being created before the little ones are. Um, you have to sort of understand that this race of people, even in day 6, they're created before man is. And in the Second Peter 3, it says a day is 1,000 years, and it's talking about creation and prehistory and a time before Genesis 1 to 2, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole I won't go down today. So you could have had these serpent beings created over 1,000 years before the people of day 6. And then the Adamites are created sometime later, after day 7, which is a different creation. Again, a rabbit hole I don't want to go down today, but the details are so different and conflicting. It has to be two different creations or the Bible is in complete conflict. So I look at it as two different sort of creations. So yeah. Again, I mean, it's unbelievable how much is in there. And the Istari would be the same as Ishtar, as we've talked about, which is the same as Isis, another offspring god. You have um, Astarte, Ashtaroth. It's the same transliteration of the same queen. And you have post-Diluvian goddesses with the same title and an allegorical for the original female matriarchal god. And you also have antediluvian ones. So, a good example would be out of the Canaanite pantheon. El is the patriarch god before the flood. He creates giants. His son, offspring god Baal, rules after the flood. El's consort is Ashtaroth, and Baal's consort is Anat.
Mm, yeah.
And
Uh,
all of those are dragon kings or dragon gods, chief gods, and both are fairy queens of the same sort of allegory. So, and that's why you have Lilith going back to Tiamat in its
yeah.
sort of connection of the matriarchal bloodline.
Mm. Um, Concerning the um, seraphim,
Yeah.
are they split into two groups? Let's say one that was very malevolent and another one that was benevolent, or were they all, you know, had a very bad
Yeah.
influence?
So seraphim are talked about in Isaiah 6, and they're shown in heaven working before the altar before God, and they actually take a stone and take it to the lips of Isaiah to take away his sin so that he can be there and receive the vision. And so we also get these watchers that show up in Daniel 4, and they come from the presence of God. And it actually says watchers, the Hebrew word Maiar, which is also the second part of the word for satyr, which means devil, hairy goat god. And then, in other words, it's a degraded, probably seraphim, but degraded watcher nonetheless. And it's providing the edicts of God for ruling. And where the seraphim fit is they look after from their minister aspect, the religious sort of aspect, and also they look after from this passage the governance and the kingship of the earth, which is why the original kings before the flood were depicted as mostly serpents, and again shortly after the flood, or before those traits start to recede with intermarriage with humans. And so the seraphim are shown after the flood as loyal angels. And then you have the sons of God, which the seraphim are part of the watchers who create the giants. There's four groups of watchers. Seraphim is thought in the standard chronology be at the apex of the watchers. I think archangels are higher, but that's just my own preference on that. And I would put them as a watcher, which the standard Christian dogma doesn't, because they're in the presence of God, or at least the leaders of the archangels are there. So yeah, you have loyal ones and you have rebellious ones.
Okay.
And that's the best way to simplify it. So, and in all the orders and ranks of the angels, there was probably ones that rebelled. So there's a lot of rebelled angels. It's not just a few hundred. We know in the end time, we have a number of a third of the angels that have rebelled. And whether it happens all at once or slowly over time. It doesn't say that, but we sort of look at that. It happened all in prehistory with that rebellion. And we're also told the number of the host of heaven is uncountable. So it's a big number. And then in Daniel 8, and then in the book of Revelation, they use the same description to give probably an allegorical number, but it makes it a big number. It's 10,000 times 10,000 that are around the throne. That's 100 million. Whether it's allegorical or literal, it's a big number. So if a third rebelled, you can calculate that as 33 million or 50 million, however you want to split that out. And there's a lot of angels that are fallen that still run the council of the gods in this world, even though ones were put into the pit prison for their crimes before the flood and shortly after. Not all are in the pit prison. There are still ones that are running this world.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of them out there.
Yeah. Yeah. So another thing that comes automatically when I hear the term Lord of the Rings, I have to think of Saturn. And it is no secret that, yeah, our so-called elites for a long, long time worshipped Saturn.
Yeah. Well, and Saturn represents the chief god as a planet in the seven wandering stars.
Yeah.
And Saturday, as it shows up in the days of week, reflecting the same. And it's also a combination of Greek, Roman, and Norse gods, all the same gods, just different names in each of the pantheons that are in there. So, yeah, this is probably one of the sources to the term Lord of the Rings, because it represents the chief god, the one that sits above the council of the gods. And again, council of gods is in the Bible in Psalms 82. It's in polytheist religions all around the world, whether or not it is Nippur in the Sumerian tradition, whether or not it's the assembly of the Baalim at Mount Hermon in the Ugaritic texts. It's a constant. And again, it's this assembly and this ring of governors, both visible and invisible, that is important here. And I think Saturn represented that ring avagory and the chief god that sits above the other gods that are listed. And so like Iluvatar is the high one of the the eight lower ones, and there's seven wandering stars in that group, and where the eighth comes from is one individual called Melkor, which is um, the most powerful but not listed amongst the seven, which again is encoding something that probably is referencing to the God of the Bible, or at least an acknowledgement that that one is has equal power with Satan, and in this case, Iluvatar.
Mm, yeah. Um, so also with these rings, the rings themselves, so originally there were 19 rings. Yeah. And okay, this what is his name? Celebrimbor, who uh, Lord of the what was it? Lord of Aragon, yeah. And Anatar, Lord of Gifts. Anatar is a Maya. I'm sorry. And he instructed Celebrimbor how to forge rings. So then first they had 16, and then Celebrimbor forged three, and those three went to the elves,
Yep.
and then this Anatar, who allegedly is just a pseudonym for Sauron, made the one ring that connects them all.
Yep.
So, even if you look at it, because they also like to play around with the numerology,
Yes.
yeah, you
Yep.
have the 19, 1 plus
Prime.
9 is 10, 1 plus 0 is 1. So it
Yep.
boils down to one ring.
Yes. And 19 is also a prime number, which they also like. So, yeah, there's lots of things that they're going to weave in there. And you can't help but notice the connection of Calibrim with Caliburn, which is the Scythian Tuatha Da Danann root word for Excalibur
Mhm.
and the sword.
Yeah.
And that would go along with the ring lords of the Scythians
Mhm.
as they're connected in. But again, I don't want to get too far ahead of where you're going with this. I just thought I'd sort of connect that in. So yeah, this is a ring of kings. So the rings would be to different kinds of peoples, and the largest portion would be of the noble um, elves. Now, I don't think he shows that there's multiple rings with the noble elves, but I haven't seen or found or counted up where it gets to be 19 different ones. So, but they all merge into one assembly or ring or round table, just as King Arthur is a similar type of allegory and so similar type of literature as the mythopoetic style, but a precursor of it written in the time of the Crusades and sponsored by the Rosicrucians, not the Rosicrucians, the Templars and the Priory of Sion, who have Grail um, Templar knights written into that before they're supposed to be in power. And so what's interesting about that is the round table is the ring. And these kings are not just they're not knights, they're kings from Norway. There are kings from elsewhere that's united in this ring or this round table. And Arthur is king. He's a sun god. And he is um, son of Uther Pendragon. And he is a Tuatha Da Danann fair folk, and his wife is a fairy queen, Guinevere, which goes back to old Welsh and Old Irish words that basically mean a Shay, or the Shay people as the Sedai, and all the different transliterations of that. Banshees, evil spirits, whatever you want to translate that in. And she's a fairy queen, and she's from the fair folk as well. She's a Tuatha da Dannan. And then you have that whole allegory that's sort of wrapped in there. So it's it's a similar, the Lord of the Rings is the similar kind of literature to the Grail tales. And it's, again, it's a fictional story based on real characters, real history, real belief systems, and tons of things that are encoded in it, especially the bloodlines. So one suspects if you could get in behind these names a little bit better and meanings, there would be genealogies embedded throughout the Lord of the Rings, just as there is throughout the Grail tales and the tales of King Arthur and the Celtic Camelot kingdoms. And
Mm,
so, Lot, as in Lancelot, Camelot, Lot of Sodom and Gomorrah, a shining city of knowledge on a hill, just as Camelot is. Lot is also in Norway as well as in France, again, representing connections at many different sort of levels. And so, again, I won't go through, we're not here to talk about the complete King Arthur sort of tales, but understand this was a Norse sponsored kingship at that time, and that when Rollo and William the Conqueror are trying to win wars, they're trying to win back what they had as part of that Lord of the Rings that they were part of in with King Arthur. So it was a great alliance of sort of kings.
mm. It feels, at least the movies, I have to say, when you watch it, it feels a little bit, in terms of timing, like pre-Christian Anglo-Saxon world.
Yeah.
Would you
It
agree with that, or is it just me?
yeah, like you have the characters that are more Norse
Mm,
on the Celtic fairy side, but the culture is definitely rooted in King Arthur,
mhm.
right? And the whole sort of setting, as you say, is King Arthur like. And so, yes, that would be, I think, very, very accurate. So, as I say, they take artistic license, but that artistic license also tells other connections.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So believe it or not, 1 hour is gone.
Yes, it
So
is.
it is. And yeah, we will see the patrons on the other side.